What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
JFK supported Palestinian refugee rights, opposed Israel's nuclear weapons program and expansionist war plans, and tried to force AIPAC to register as a foreign agent. From the moment he took office in January 1961,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God.
JFK made it crystal clear that nuclear weapon non-proliferation was a pillar of his presidency as part of his quest for global disarmament, the abolition of nuclear weapons and all weapons of war, and ending the capacity of all nations to wage war. His Zionist vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who was primarily loyal to Israel, did not share JFK's values.
I have already taken steps to coordinate and expand our disarmament effort and to make arms control a central goal of our national policy under my direction. The deadly arms race and the huge resources it absorbs have too long overshadowed all else we must do. We must prevent that arms racing from spreading to new nations, to new nuclear powers.
Not only was LBJ opposed to every aspect of JFK's peace and disarmament policies, Johnson in the 1940s had illegally shipped weapons in boxes marked Texas grapefruit to Zionist terrorist militias who ethnically cleansed the Palestinians in the 1948 Nakba. Neither JFK nor his brother and confidant, Robert Kennedy, wanted LBJ in the White House, as revealed by JFK's widow, Jackie Kennedy.
It was only months after her husband's assassination when a 34-year-old widow sat down to record more than 8 hours of recollections about her husband and his most private thoughts, while they were still fresh. JFK and his brother Bobby on Lyndon Johnson, the new president.
Bobby told me this later, and I know Jack said it to me sometimes. He said, "Oh God, can you ever imagine what would happen to the country if Lyndon was president?" So many times he'd say it if there was ever a problem.
Lyndon Johnson was a pathological liar, as reported by Bobby Kennedy, who said, "LBJ lies all the time. I'm telling you, he just lies continually about everything. He lies even when he doesn't have to lie." Speaking of lies, by May of 1963, JFK was furious at Israel for lying to him constantly about their nuclear weapons program. Kennedy delivered a near ultimatum to Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion: allow meaningful American inspections of Israel's reactor in Dimona to prove it wasn't being used for nuclear weapons, or Israel would risk losing all American and Western support. Also, Ben-Gurion established his ambition to, quote, abolish partition and expand to the whole of Palestine, end quote, as far back as 1937, when Israel attempted to conquer the Gaza Strip and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula, seize the Suez Canal, and overthrow Egypt's President Nasser, with help from Britain and France, in the 1956-57 Suez Crisis. President Eisenhower kicked Israel out of Egypt using boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Lyndon Johnson, the leader of the Senate in 1957, strongly opposed Eisenhower's sanctions against Israel, but President Eisenhower overruled him and told Israel to pound sand and withdraw. JFK, who was also a senator in 1957, did not rush to Israel's defense or attempt to undermine Eisenhower's sanctions against Israel the way LBJ had.
Thousands of Israelis demonstrate in Jerusalem against withdrawal from Gaza and Aqaba. Mr. Ben-Gurion, the premier, enters to announce the government's decision to the Knesset, Israel's parliament.
Nearly the entire world applauded the Eisenhower administration for compelling the Israeli aggressor to back off. The American ambassador in Egypt said, "The U.S. has suddenly emerged as a real champion of right." Eisenhower's handling of the crisis was a high point of his presidency. It upheld the authority and moral stance of the United Nations and the ideals of the United States. Israel learned an important lesson from this humiliating retreat. The only way Israel would be able to conquer and hold on to the West Bank, Gaza, and vast tracts of Egyptian and Syrian territory in the 1960s was by placing a Zionist puppet they could control in the White House. President Kennedy had a warm and cooperative relationship with Egypt's President Nasser, whom Ben-Gurion hysterically denounced as a would-be Hitler without any factual basis.
We want to be friendly to all the world. We want to participate in the case of peace. We want to cooperate with the world to avoid war. We have to defend our territory against aggression, and we insist about gaining the rights of the Arabs of Palestine, the 1 million refugees. We are insisting and we are calling to give the Palestine refugees their rights, their territory, and their land and their homes.
Overthrowing Egypt's President Nasser was one of Israel's numerous objectives that JFK opposed. Additionally, JFK was in sync with President Nasser in putting enormous diplomatic pressure on Israel's Ben-Gurion to allow hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes or be given the option of compensation and resettlement. This would have largely reversed Ben-Gurion's Plan Dalet, which Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, in which Ben-Gurion and other Zionist terrorist leaders masterminded the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, using terrorism and the mass slaughter of civilians to expel 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and destroy 530 Palestinian villages.
Palestinians who fled often carried only enough to stay away for a few weeks, hoping they'd eventually return home.
A lot of them locked their doors, put their key in their pocket, and then moved to safer ground. When you leave the house and you take your key with you, it's because you're planning to go home. In the case of the Palestinians, those refugees weren't allowed to return.
Refugees trying to return were often shot at. Zionist paramilitary operations also tried to prevent them from returning again by destroying the villages.
That act of preventing their return compounded the Nakba. So the Nakba is both the forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes and lands and country, as well as preventing them to return once the fighting was over.
Palestinian society was dismembered, crushed. More than half of the Palestinian people became refugees, stateless, dispossessed of their land.
Over time, the State of Israel covered up the physical evidence of an Arab Palestine. Place names were often changed from Arabic ones to Hebrew ones. The Jewish National Fund embarked on a massive effort to plant thousands of acres of pine forests and recreational areas on top of hundreds of ruined Palestinian villages.
Even though these forests have now grown into big pine trees, Palestinians have not forgotten their homelands.
JFK's proposed return of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees would have upended Israel's violently engineered Zionist Jewish majority status. Prior to Ben-Gurion's Operation Dalet in 1948, Jews constituted only 1/3 of the population of historic Palestine, even after massive immigration from Europe over the prior decade. In 1947, Jews controlled only 7% of the land of Palestine before Zionist militias stole huge amounts of Palestinian land to create the State of Israel. Furthermore, JFK's refugee return would have de facto blocked Israel's long-game maximalist Middle East ambition to create a massive Greater Israel empire from the Euphrates River to the Nile River, what Zionist rabbis called the Promised Land, swallowing all of Palestine and Jordan, plus large chunks of Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and all of Lebanon. Ben-Gurion utterly resisted JFK's Palestinian refugee return plan and wrote in the fall of 1962, quote, "Israel will fight against this implementation down to the last man," end quote. In fact, the Zionist Stern Gang terrorist leader Yitzhak Shamir, who later became the 7th Prime Minister of Israel, oversaw the assassination of UN peace mediator Count Volker Bernadotte in 1948, in large part because Bernadotte also, like JFK and President Nasser, wanted the Palestinian refugees to be able to return to their homes.
On the 17th of September 1948, Count Volker Bernadotte landed at Calandia Airport, north of Jerusalem. Heading towards the YMCA, the 3-car convoy was suddenly halted. An army jeep pulled out from a side street to block the road. 3 men in Israeli army fatigues sprang out of the jeep.
Then suddenly the Count opens the window of his car so he can see what's happening. Then they identify him, and Yehoshua Cohen goes to the car, puts his Schmeisser submachine gun in through the window, and unloads on everyone sitting in the rear seat.
By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Bernadotte lay dead in hospital. Politicians and diplomats representing their countries at the UN meeting in Paris came to Orly Airport to pay their last respects.
Following the Bernadotte slaying, Israel's Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion granted a general amnesty to all the guilty parties. He chose assassin Yehoshua Cohen to be his close friend and personal bodyguard at Kibbutz Sde Boker in the Negev. Ben-Gurion created and supervised the Mossad, and Yitzhak Shamir became the Mossad Director of Assassinations, a position Shamir held at the time of the JFK assassination in 1963. For Israel, the JFK assassination was the sequel to the Bernadotte assassination 15 years earlier. On top of everything else, JFK was livid at Israel's lobbyists in America, such as Abraham Feinberg and Isaiah Kennan, for shamelessly attempting to buy his entire Middle East foreign policy during the 1960 presidential campaign. He directed his Attorney General and brother RFK to register the American Zionist Council, the predecessor to AIPAC, as a foreign agent. An attorney who worked for Israel's lobbyists wrote that this effort would eventually destroy the entire Zionist movement. Had the Kennedy brothers' registration efforts succeeded, it likely would have resulted in the end of the State of Israel, because these same American Zionist lobbyists for Israel, such as Abraham Feinberg, would have been exposed for funding Israel's nuclear weapons project, contrary to JFK's entire foreign policy. Furthermore, Israel's agents in America were illegally and treasonously stealing nuclear weapons material